everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I am the Darklight Emissary, and this episode is finally on the Eldar, or specifically, the Craftworld Aeldari. The first thing to understand about the Aeldari is just how old this species and civilization is. They are a millions-year-old culture. As far as it is known, the Eldar as a species was engineered or created by an ancient precursor species called the Old Ones to fight the ancient Necrontyr, or Necrons as they would later be called, and their gods, known as the Catan. But the details of that time period are best meant for a video specifically on it, which will be covered eventually. It is just best to know that this to get the idea of just how old the Eldar are. Eventually, the war with the ancient star gods drew to a close, and with that closing of war, the Aeldari were left as a wider civilization with no peer enemies in the stars truly. The Old Ones were gone and dead, and the Necrons went to sleep. There were others, like the Orcs and other species not mentioned or that didn't survive into the current era of 40k, but none could rival the Eldar in technology or power. They reigned supreme over basically the entire galaxy, largely unchallenged for millions of years. The only enemies they truly had to fight and curb were the nascent demonic hordes of the current chaos gods of the time period. The Aeldari eventually reached such a level of luxury and needs met that most of them started engaging solely in hedonistic, sadist, and myriad other lifestyles and life paths. A single Aeldari can live to over 1,000 years or much longer in age. Some have lived for unthinkable amounts of lifetimes compared to a regular person, or human I should say. Coupled with all of this was a high level of arrogance due to their unbroken eras of prosperity and ease of living, and with it came a great error in their judgments that this could never end, basically. One of the most important and double-edged traits of the Aeldari is that they are, all of them as a species, psychic. While not all of them are capable of psyker level power feats, they are all imprint greatly onto the warp. This is an important thing to understand about the realm of unreality known as the warp. Most living things imprint upon it their emotions, and the Eldar have a stronger connection and influence upon it due to how psychic their species is. They built entire cities and lattice worked through entire worlds their psychoactive substance known as Wraithbone. This is literally crystallized psychic energy brought from the warp itself by being sung into creation by Aeldari bone singers. This is how close to the warp they truly became in its workings. Notable, along with this, the webway itself is largely made, if not completely, from Wraithbone and its latticework network. The Old Ones created that spreads throughout the warp to be safe pathways through it without having to deal with the horrors of that realm. The Eldar were the main inheritors of this system after the Old Ones' demise. Eventually, due to this strong connection with the warp and their chosen lifestyles, the sheer amount of hedonistic, sadist pathways many Aeldari chose to live fed something new in the warp, something that thirsted in excess. The Dark Prince, or She Who Thirsts. Signs of this new god in the warp started mounting, and great seers of the Aeldari people started warning them that something was coming. This did not stop most from forsaking these chosen lifestyles and choices. Some Aeldari lived their lives aboard gigantic world-like ships called Craftworlds, and they would spend their time nomadically traveling around the galaxy as traders, trading with various civilizations, and then coming home to the Aeldari homeworlds to trade what they had brought. Due to being mostly cut off from the rest of Aeldari society during these long trips, they did not really delve into their dark hungers and appetites, and were becoming increasingly unsettled by the darker and darker nature of their own species' civilization. The species became largely obsessed with emotional excess and pleasure, creating entire pleasure cults, as they were called, centered on studying and achieving higher and higher levels of pleasure through debauchery and sadistic means. Notably, many of these cults and this dark society set up massive cities in the webway system itself. These would eventually be known as the Drukhari, or Dark Eldar, which will be its own episode, possibly after this one. Many of the Farseers that saw the coming of Slaanesh enlisted the aid of the Craftworlds to evacuate those who would forsake the pleasure cults, and took with them what of their civilization on their homeworlds they could. Basically, just like Noah's Ark, the Farseers knew that their homeworlds were doomed, that there was a flood coming, and that to stay there was to court obliteration and oblivion by the primordial annihilator's newest aspect, being fed by their species' appetites. The Aeldari actually had a pantheon of warp gods that they worshipped that were all consumed by Slaanesh in its birth, with the exceptions of only 3, like Kegarak, the Laughing God, who is hidden in the webway, Kaela-Mensha Cain, their war god, and Isha. Cain was broken apart after a battle between Khorne and Slaanesh over who could devour him, and he was forced into real space, where a piece of him appeared at the heart of every craft world, and he was broken permanently this way. Isha was taken captive by the chaos god Nurgle, where she resides to this day, and on occasion, craft worlds can summon an avatar of Cain to war. Eventually, Slaanesh burst forth upon the universe. With its birth cries, many billions of Eldar souls were ripped from their bodies and consumed by this new god. And such was the power and death of so many souls at once that the warp ripped a physical tear into real space at the epicenter of the former Eldar Empire. This rip became known as the Eye of Terror later on. Tides of demons overtook their homeworlds and glutted upon the ruins of the towers of this once all-powerful civilization. Many craft worlds were consumed by the spreading rip in space. Several others were caught in the eye's orbit and didn't have the strength to pull away, but survived. Many more did make it out into the wider galaxy in time though, and over time, these craft worlds were built up and became larger, from 10 to 100 times or even bigger in size as their populations grew, and lived exclusively now on these gigantic vessels. Each craft world is a bespoke, different culture within the wider Aeldari civilization, but while it is speculated by some that perhaps most of the current Aeldari live on craft worlds, I tend to believe personally these are still basically refugee parts of the species from that fall of their kind. The Drukhari or Dark Eldar largely avoided the fall due to being inside the webway at the time, and Kamarog is a fathomlessly large solar system-sized dark city in this other realm with an unreality. It would make sense for that civilization to remain and grow over the millennia still largely unaffected and unassaulted except by infighting between themselves and some failing parts of the webway over time. That being said, while true numbers are not specifically ever really said, craft worlds are truly gigantic, traveling worlds with many souls living on them, possibly in the millions or more Aeldari on each of them. The true number of craft worlds is not known. Craft worlds are made entirely of wraith bone as a structure, and organically are grown bigger and expanded as needed over time. With Slaanesh now active in the warp, Eldar upon death are in danger of their very souls being eaten by that god. Giving the Chaos God the title of She Who Thirsts. To get around this, each Aeldari on craft worlds carries with them a stone, called a soul stone. If they die, their souls are captured by these devices, and then they are embedded in the wraith bone of the craft world at the heart, called the Infinity Circuit. An interesting development of note is that a nascent new god in the warp is growing called Yanid, the god of the dead. Each death that contributes to the Infinity Circuit further fuels this god of death into being, and it is hoped by the species that one day Yanid will be fully powerful enough and able to manifest to challenge Slaanesh and free them from their doom at the Prince of Pleasure's hands. This Infinity Circuit gives each craft world a collective hive mind and makes the ship itself alive, aware as its own entity. Another interesting aspect of craft worlds is that one of them contains the Black Library, or basically is the Black Library, which is the single largest repository of knowledge on the Chaos Gods in the entire galaxy. Very few beings are allowed into this craft world, which roams the webway in secretive paths unknown to all except select members of the Aeldari species in a council called the Black Council, and Harlequins, who are devotees of the god Kegarak, the Laughing God, who is the master of the webway. Until I reread this about craft worlds, I hadn't realized the Black Library was a craft world itself. I'm not sure if this is a new part of the lore or not. Someone can leave a comment clarifying if they want, but I personally had previously thought it was an static but hidden part of the webway in original tellings, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Also of note is that Ahriman, Chief Librarian, Sorcerer of the Thousand Suns Legion, seeks the Black Library, and it is speculated if Ahriman ever did reach the Black Library and obtain its knowledge, he may become some form of god himself. Life on each Craftworld is different with some specific similarities. One of the chief traits of Craftworld Eldar is that they all decide to follow a specific path, exclusively for a time. This is to help regulate their strong emotions as a species to avoid the same mistakes that fed Slaanesh in the past. This can be for anything, from farming, hunting, all kinds of things. But when it involves paths involving war, these are known as the aspects of war they devote themselves to. Most Craftworld have aspect warriors, and the ones that devote themselves fully to a path permanently are known as exarchs. And they wear special ancient armor that holds in it all the previous souls that were previously exarchs in that position. The individual also takes on the personality of the original exarch of that shrine. Most, though, eventually move on from a war aspect and feel the call towards something more civics-based later on. Although basically all Aeldari are at least basically trained militarily, and form a type of militia in times of war called Guardians, at the very least. I'm going to go over briefly the major Craftworlds that are known and a bit of their histories. I encourage you to look them up and stories about them if you want to know details, but figured I would bring up a few aspects of each one. The first Craftworld is known as Alatok, or Alatic. They are known for following most stringently the pathways to avoid the sadist ways of their ancient past. But individual citizens are permitted to leave the Craftworld for a time to be free of the rigid structure, and they mostly become rangers, which is a type of scout and sniper in Aeldari society. These will still come to the aid of the Craftworld if called in emergency. Some become corsairs, or pirates basically as well, wandering the galaxy and plundering other species. One of the specializations of the Craftworld is a specific type of ranger called Pathfinders, basically an ultimate hit and run force. Clad in blue and yellow color scheme, they represent themselves with a sword rune that is styled after the sword of Val that was used by their smith god in a war against their war god Cain, representing a defiance and determination of this people. The Craftworld itself is described as a gigantic continent-sized flat disk with hundreds of internal layers or levels, trailed by gigantic solar sails that drive it through space. Eventually, due to predations by Aeldari corsairs in relation to this Craftworld, the Imperium discovered it and staged a full-scale invasion of the Craftworld. A combined force of Aeldari involving an avatar of Cain and several Phoenix Lords, who founded the warrior shrines, helped in the defense of this Craftworld, and eventually the Imperium was driven from this Craftworld successfully after a driving and bloody assault into this world. Bieltan is the next major Craftworld, and they are mainly focusing on trying to reforge the old empire of the Aeldari. They often are found scouring colonizing forces of other species on any worlds that the Eldar have ancient claim to. Bieltan places great importance on the path of the warrior, first for its coming-of-age population, and they are known for their strong warrior aspect as a Craftworld. They believe that dying with honor in battle is one of the highest one can be given. They place at the center of their Craftworld the spear stones of dead aspect warriors, and when the seers of this Craftworld require counsel, they go there to commune with these spirits. They make great use of fast tank and anti-grav vehicles like wave serpents or falcon grab tanks. The Bieltan have a special hatred for the orcs and prioritize them over most enemies when assaulting a target, to the point where they have assisted Imperial forces being attacked by extra strong orc forces. They even have a cannon on their tanks with a specialized sterilizing technovirus used to stop the orc reproduction process. Clad in green and white, this culture is represented by the Rune of Rebirth, and translates to Rebirth of Ancient Days. The Eenden Craftworld was one of the most powerful Craftworlds originally. This Craftworld focused mostly in a great war against Chaos itself, and Bieltan joined them as a major ally for thousands of years in this task, tirelessly working to try and grow a new foundation for a new empire. Eventually, however, this Craftworld ran into the Tyranids, who are a extragalactic xenospecies that devours all in its path that is biological. Entire worlds stripped clean of anything organic. They are sometimes simply known as the Great Devourer. At first, the Craftworld was warned by the Craftworld called Ulthwé and its most powerful psyker, Eldar Uthran, of the threat. They thought at first they could handle this threat, but they underestimated the truly numberless amount of Tyranids represented. A cataclysmic war happened on the Craftworld, with the Eldar fighting fiercely and tirelessly against the innumerable swarms of the Tyranid Hype Fleet, Kraken, as it was called. Eventually, the invasion was repelled, but at terrible cost, and the Craftworld now drifts as a near mausoleum compared to its former glory. Due to this loss of life, this Craftworld is known to rely more on their version of Dreadnought, called Wraith Lords, and other constructs like them, which are powered by the Soul Stones of the Fallen. This Craftworld is themed by a gold and blue motif, and their rune is representative of Assyrion, who was the greatest of their gods, meaning light in the darkness. The next Craftworld is the Saim Han. They are known for their fierce warrior class, and they are known for their rapid speed and deployment in battle on jet bikes as a type of preferred vehicle. Due to their martial pride, they often come into conflict with other Craftworlds and are harder to work with. They are known as the most barbaric of the worlds, and their culture is one of feudal families and hereditary inheritance. Their rune is known for the meaning of quest for enlightenment, and they are often in a red or scarlet color theme. Last but certainly not least, we have Craftworld Ulthwé. This is the Craftworld I probably know most about on my own, because they were the main Craftworld representative in some of the Dawn of War games, and they are also the ones most involved in the fates of other species. This Craftworld was caught in the orbit of the Eye of Terror, and it's been trapped there ever since. Due to the proximity to chaos, this Craftworld constantly fights a defensive war against those forces. This world is more hardened compared to the others due to the more constant onslaught against them. This world also has a lesser amount of aspect warriors, and most of their force is made up of a more specialized citizen warrior guardian force called Black Guardians. Due to their proximity to the Eye, this world has a larger number of what are known as warlocks and other powerful psykers. They form what is known as the Seer Council, and this was once led by Eldar Uthran, who was also possibly the most powerful living psyker of the species during his time. Due to their amount of foresight from their seers, they are able to very accurately picture paths to avoid dangers for their people. But this often has the consequence of obliterating large amounts of other species if it means saving even a small amount of Aeldari lives, such as the Second War of Armageddon, which was caused by them. Despite this, Ulthwé actually shares possibly the closest relationship with humanity and the Imperium of Man, and specific individuals and factions in it. A few notable things about Eldar Uthran, for example. He is likely to have known the Emperor of Mankind personally, and he tried to help humanity avoid the Horus Heresy by contacting Fulgrim, the Primarch of the Emperor's children. This may have worked out, but by this time Fulgrim was already on the road to damnation due to being corrupted by Slaanesh at this point already. And Eldrad was also involved with the Cabal of alien species, as they were known, that helped steer the Alpha Legion on their course as traitors as well. Ulthwé is best viewed as a double-edged sword when dealing with them. They can be a great tool and helpful to you, but will also throw you into oncoming traffic to save their own if needed. Their world rune resembles an eye, and they are often clad in black. There are also quite a few minor craft worlds. I won't go into them all. The one that I found most interesting, though, was the Altensar craft world. This one was known as a smaller one in size, and they were overtaken into the Eye of Terror at its birthing and thought lost at its expansion. Its only known survivor was Magan Ra, one of the Phoenix Lords. And during the 13th Black Crusade, he entered the Eye of Terror and discovered the craft world had survived somehow intact. And he led them out of the Eye of Terror successfully. Most other craft worlds view them with hostility and suspicion, though, because of how pernicious chaos corruption is. There is a reason you do not see worshippers of chaos amongst Eldar, because if they exist, they only do so briefly before Slaanesh claims their soul even quicker, devouring it whole. How the Altensar avoided this fate for 10,000 years in the Eye of Terror is not exactly known, which is why they are so suspected by their brethren. Their rune is known as the Broken Chain, symbolizing several gods who escaped the dungeons of the war god Cain and the links that bound their smith god Baal to his anvil. And they have a broken infinity loop added at the top to symbolize avoiding eternal damnation in the eye. So that is a somewhat brief overview of the Craftworld Eldar. There's quite a few stories I encourage you to go read. There are some novels that focus on different paths of the Craftworld Eldar, and I haven't read them. I also need to read them as well. I just have never been super interested in the Eldar personally, but as with anything in Warhammer, I find their overall story really fun. Not too many other books exist with Craftworld Eldar as the protagonists, and I've seen a lot of fans complain about that over the years on Reddit and other forums. Most of what I know regarding them comes from several of the games I've played over the years, like the Dawn of War series and Battlefleet Gothic Armada 1 and 2. They are quite fascinating, and there's deeper bits to their history that are too much to go into in this overview. As always, please like and subscribe if you'd like to see more of this content. Please see my previous content on the Primarchs and the Legions if that interests you. And please leave a comment correcting anything or discussing any point of the video, or requesting further content for the future. Bring your light into the dark places, and thank you once again for spending some time here. I will see you in the next one, which I think will be on the cousins to the Craftworld Eldar, the Drukhari, or Dark Eldar. Thank you, and have a great day or night, wherever you are.